Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session of the OMP Summit entitled COBOL Working Groups Working Storage. My name is Derek Britton. I work at Micro Focus, who are quite well known for their COBOL products. But more importantly, today I'm delighted to be one of the founding members of the new COBOL Working Group within the Open Mainframe project. And this session, the title is, of course, a play on words. Anyone who knows anything about COBOL, even from the dim and distant past, will know what working storage is. So to continue that pun, let's get to work and look into what we'll cover in this session. All right, per the agenda and the schedule for the summit, this session is going to cover a few key things. A few key elements about the computer language called COBOL, why it still matters to us all, how it's stuck around so long and been, excuse me, frankly, so successful, and what issues and challenges it's facing today, and what the Open Mainframe project is looking to do about that. Now, I'll be assuming some rudimentary knowledge, and no more, on your part about COBOL. So, you know what it is, what it does. But aside from that, we'll keep it fairly high level. I hope there's anyone at the summit who has COBOL in their organization or is serving customers with COBOL systems in their organization will get something from this. Now, there's quite a lot to cover in the short amount of time we've given ourselves. So let's dive straight in. Let's start with a fairly staggering fact, shall we? Many of you will doubtless know this, of course, but worth restating. The COBOL programming language is now, as of 2020, into its 7th decade of loyal service to the IT community. Now, depending on where you set that original date, COBOL is now 61 years old. The term was first coined by the Codicil Committee in September 1959. If records are correct. Now, since then, it's been in widespread use across the globe as a core IT business systems language. Now, of course, back in 1960, things weren't even called IT then. I think data processing hadn't even been coined as a phrase. We certainly didn't have the IBM mainframe at that stage, let alone the internet or the cloud. But we had COBOL, which was invented, like I say, in 1959, and first saw the light of day as a piece of technology later on in 1960. So what is COBOL? Well, a few statements to, I'm sure, just remind us. COBOL runs system of record applications. It's used to build system of record applications at literally tens of thousands of organizations worldwide. It supports banking, insurance, transportation, government, retail, healthcare, many other industry sectors. It comprises, according to all estimates we read, literally hundreds of billions of lines of code running applications worldwide. And it remains overwhelmingly strategic, and we can quantify this with a 92% response rate from the marketplace in a 2020 survey saying that their core applications in COBOL were strategic to the business. Worth noting finally, if you didn't already know, COBOL was actually designed by and remains orchestrated and managed by an independent authority. It's not owned by anybody. There's no single organization that owns the IP. While there are differences, of course, between that approach and others, you could perhaps argue it's one of the first open projects of its kind, and certainly long before anyone had considered that term. So I think it's very much, spiritually at least, very at home in what the OMP is trying to do. Now, you might imagine that after such a long time in the marketplace and such a long period of success that the interest in the technology might have tailed off. And some of us, of course, remember the spike of the Y2K days in the late 90s. but more recently, you could be forgiven for imagining that COBOL has drifted off into a fairly sleepy glacial state. Well, the reality is quite the opposite, in fact. I mean, first of all, last year was the 60th anniversary, and it went off with something of a bang. Vendors and commentators alike made quite a lot of noise in the industry and in the press and elsewhere about the language. And a lot of people were asking, how's it made it that far? How's it made it to 60? Which we'll come back to later. And on the back of that, there was a market survey commissioned by my employers, Micro Focus, that captured some fresh evidence of usage in the marketplace and caused, again, further interest and discussion. Now, more recently, perhaps, as we all know, the industry has been turned upside down by the pandemic, which has created its own news stories about various organizations and their reliance on one form of technology or another, including COBOL systems, and whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. There's been a lot of press about that too. Now, finally, and worth noting again, we all know of the advent and the rising popularity and ubiquity of the cloud, and how this has also impacted how and perhaps even where core business systems need to reside and execute going forward. And that includes COBOL systems as well. And that sparked another round of conversation and more broadly, a topic about COBOL suitability for the digital age. So it's not been out of the press at all, not been out of the news, and worthy discussions, each one of them. So all in all, its 60th anniversary year was quite a busy one. But let's just stop for a second and consider 60 years. That's a remarkable achievement, isn't it, if you think about it? It's not often that in IT, at least, an established and trusted technology such as COBOL, and certainly COBOL running on the mainframe very much, the key example of that. Not often that anyone reaches that kind of milestone. And yet, that's with good reason. COBOL is still affecting our daily lives, perhaps more than people imagine. Booking an airline ticket, getting cash out, getting a new car insurance quote, shipping a parcel, whatever it may be. They're all prime examples, prime use cases for COBOL running on a back-end system somewhere, typically on mainframe, typically with the help of kicks. Often seen a bit of a holy trinity, if you like, those three technologies for core business systems. These are constant and unchanging parts of day-to-day life and industries that support it. Now, evidence of COBOL's ongoing usage is everywhere, and this time last year, the 60th anniversary was celebrated, like I say. Notable press coverage of that, and some significant pieces of coverage and assets from 2019 that has continued into this year. So just a quick recap then. 100 separate articles published on the topic in the last 12 months alone. 5 million social media impressions, according to a study we undertook. A very active community conversation around COBOL. And interestingly, the COBOL programmers Facebook group, something of a barometric measure of popularity of things, has shot up in the last couple of years from something around 9,000 to 16,000 today. So there's an outpouring of continued support in the community for what is clearly a fairly legendary language. And I thought I'd throw this up there for us. Perhaps the best way to illustrate this is that, what's the latest metric of something that's newsworthy? Well, perhaps you could argue that social media itself is the right thing to measure. So Twitter, it's interesting that the IEEE report from this year shows COBOL to be in the top 10 of computing language searches for the year. It's interesting, COBOL in the top 10 of Twitter searches. I think we can forgive the publishers for not listing it as uppercase, but That's a lot of chatter about COBOL in 2020 for a language that is, well, quite so old. So, okay, COBOL's great, it's well designed, and it's evolved to meet changing needs and all of the things that we can say positively about it. But it is an old language, and we're never far away from someone throwing rocks at it. And indeed, it's always been that case. From the very start, someone didn't like it. Keep in mind, June 1960 was before the first ever version of a working COBOL compiler had even been produced, and yet someone was already willing to complain about it. And more recently, look at these headlines from this year. So, you know, it's not all roses. Look at COBOL. Oh, it's so old. No one knows it anymore. It needs replacing. Yada yada yada. Well, I might roll my eyes at that, and many of us know that this is kind of scaremongering or you know, fairly idle report writing. This is some of the information that IT leaders, decision makers might be reading as well. This is the threat that COBOL faces: reputational damage based on what? Idle speculation, misinformation, and maybe some technical bias. We'll come back to the work of the OMP and what we're going to do about that very shortly. But before we do, let's ask ourselves that question. You know, what's the truth about COBOL? What's the secret 60 years on of its enduring success? So how's it still here running great chunks of the economy? Well, of course, the secret is that there is no secret. And for those who know all about it, you know, it's entirely understandable. COBOL's enduring success. It's not an accident. So what's good about it? Well, it boils down to these four things. There are four attributes that experts time and time again have reported, mentioned to myself and to my colleagues when we were asking our customers and the market in general about how COBOL has stood the test of time. See if you agree. But here's what I think they are: business-centric, portable, readable, adaptable. COBOL does all of those things brilliantly, and as a result, has stood the test of time. Let's look at each one very quickly. First, COBOL was designed for business, and that's what the B stands for. Well, what does that mean? Well, put simply, it runs very efficiently, very quickly, which is quite useful if you're managing millions and millions of records and countless transactions in your business systems. It handles arithmetic very, very well, very accurately, more so in fact than practically any other technology, which is also quite useful if you're processing major financial transactions all of the time, day in, day out, for some of the world's largest organizations or government agencies. It's designed around the data, which helps maintain the integrity of that data. And it's designed for how data is processed, sorted, stored. It's all out of the box and designed with high volumes in mind. Add all of that together and you have a language uniquely capable of running back-end systems and designed to do so. The second attribute is portability. Now, COBOL needs to work the same wherever you run it. Now, the original design, remember, predates any kind of standard environment. There wasn't such a thing as the go-to de facto operating system or platform back then. It was anyone's guess what was going to emerge. And even as standards emerged, there was, as you can see here, something of a clamor by many, many manufacturers to produce market-leading machinery, equipment, operating systems, chipsets. And of course, in each case, COBOL needed to be available on those platforms too. And this is a random sample of platforms and machinery, old and new, where COBOL has been engineered to work over the years. They represent business critical platforms of choice for many across the years. We can perhaps afford a wry smile about some of the names listed here and refer to them as enterprise platforms, but nonetheless, it's what the manufacturers were setting out to do. Now, some we can barely remember, and some we can obviously barely survive without, even today. And I should have started a list, of course. I should have started a list of where it doesn't run, which would have been a much shorter list. Thirdly, it's readability. It's child's play, isn't it? Part of COBOL's reputation and charm is that you can explain it to a 6th grader. Now, I know that to be true because my 11-year-old has had it done to him. Again, the specification back in the late 50s said, let's use plain English where possible and avoid symbolism where possible. So move A to B means move A to B. I think that was Grace Hopper's suggestion at the time. Almost unique in that approach because it's a language that you can easily understand. And if you can easily understand it, you can easily learn it, which is quite useful when there's a good chance, a very good chance, in fact, given its age, that you will end up having to maintain, review other people's code, because we know how old some of these systems can be. And experts across the industry agree it's a pretty straightforward task to pick up COBOL if you have any kind of computing discipline background. Now, if those 3 elements were more to do with the original design of the language, another key design feature was to ensure the language was acceptable of future adaptation, because they knew version 1 was not going to be a one and done, because they knew so much was going to come thereafter. And of course, that was exactly true. So today's COBOL does, well, actually back what it did back then very well, but also it does come a long way forward, even from COBOL 60, the first incarnation, or even ANSI 68 or ANSI 74, where things really started to standardize. And this table only, of course, scratches the surface. In fact, a fairly staggering array of continued innovation that has taken place after the language's original construction. Well, that's all evolved, and the language has evolved to support it, to continue to support the evolution of the IT world in which it lives. Platforms, managed code, virtualization, new programming constructs, third-party tools. They're all now easily supported by and integrated from COBOL. And look at the investments made in the technology by the vendors for that to happen, and the work done by the standards bodies to ensure that those definitions are clear and then, industry-wide. And now with the efforts of the organizations like the OMP to ensure new life is breathed in to the language and the environment in which it works. So whether it's new IDEs, whether it's managed services, whatever it needs to be, that adaptability continues. And I think we can all agree with Mr. Darwin, perhaps, for providing an appropriate quote here about the adaptability of technology being an absolute cornerstone attribute to its ongoing success. Okay, well, if that's the story of COBOL and why it stood the test of time, what about the Open Mainframe project's point of view? And what about this new working group that's been set up? Well, why we're here today is to take us back to, not every piece of press, not every comment about COBOL is as positive as the ones I'm bringing you here today. And so there's some work to do here to ensure that the public perception, the industry perception of the language is appropriate and is fact-based. So the OMP sparked off a discussion. There was a lot of interest in COBOL, interest in telling the truth about its attributes to ensure its future success. So it was set up in May this year. The first call took place in June, and the objectives will come to in a second. But we have 70 members already, practitioners, consultants, trainers, users, vendors, all are welcome. More than 70 members in the working group so far. Monthly meetings, including guest speakers, new initiatives, and every voice is heard. It's a meritocratic approach, brilliantly chaired by my friend Cameron C, who is something of a luminary in the industry. Many people know Cam very well, and he is an excellent chair of the group, and we're looking for more. We're looking for more people to join us. Now, what are we aiming to achieve? The objectives are laid out here, and as were submitted to the OMP board in order to set up the group in the first place. So let's read them out together. The efforts, I think, have already focused on re-establishing an appropriate level of perception of the COBOL language. The training objectives actually cross over into other OMP threads, specifically the team looking at training courses for COBOL and other technology. So we'll be working closely with those teams, already doing so. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about COBOL here as the only language to use. This is not some misguided evangelical approach to application development that says only COBOL should be used. This is about talking about using COBOL as a fit-for-purpose business language, doing what it does best, working alongside and with other technologies, as it should do. But it is to help everyone make an informed decision about IT strategy and where COBOL fits into that to avoid any costly and risky mistakes. So what's going on right now? Well, good question. Based on the objectives, we need to ensure that COBOL is seen in a positive light to anyone asking about it, and that value should be clear, and that a path to ensuring enough people can still code is also clear. Now, to that end, we have a few initiatives underway to help establish a point of view based on the truth that our members agree with, and to use that to underline COBOL's value as far and wide as is appropriate. So we want to act as proponents for the language, to help set the record straight and to offer guidelines for those who seek to learn more about COBOL and indeed to learn the language itself. So to do that, there are some research activities, promotional work we're starting just now. Quantify how much COBOL is in use, publish reports that indicate a positive reflection of COBOL, define and publish the group's view on the language, and establish some sort of presence, some web presence to articulate that. Now, there's a lot of work to do, so any positive discussion about COBOL, any single point of positive influence gives us one more reason to look positively to the future. And the more of us that are doing that, the better it will be. Now, if you want to net all that out, our point of view in a nutshell about COBOL is something that could easily be shared with others, and I think it is a very straightforward story to tell. The world needs computer systems to run economies, to run government. COBOL was designed to do just that, and it does that really, really well, peerlessly. Furthermore, and I think the group would contain that the age of something, in IT terms at least, is a metric of value, not lack of value. Electronics don't rust away. Applications don't rust. These applications are as good as they ever were, and because they're COBOL, can be adapted to support future need. So Betty Friedan's quote here is also very apt. Age is actually an opportunity. And the number? Well, that's to remind you again that the percentage of COBOL professionals who see those COBOL applications as strategic to their business is a whopping 92%. It's basically a rounding error, complete unanimous vote. So it's going to stick around because it needs to. But this is a story that needs to be articulated further and wider. And whenever there is any doubt or any misinformation about COBOL, and there still is, that's when that story needs to be told, which is, of course, where you come in. So getting involved. Well, in my view, 70 in our group is great, but I think it's only scratching the surface. And if you look at the Facebook COBOL programmers group, 16,000 and growing, I think we should be aiming quite high too, don't you? So I would be astonished if anyone in this session today is not actively using COBOL either in-house or is directly impacted by it in other terms of text strategy, integration, application modernization, skills, or training, or other core initiatives that you may be working on. So it's your chance to influence the community right here. And if you have a view on COBOL, please share it with us. We'd love to hear it. We'd love you to join us to share that information with the team. All perspectives and backgrounds, of course, are welcome. Now, I leave you with a few suggested reading references. Recent positive commentary about COBOL from the IT press, as well as at the top of this list, a really good article from our friends over at Share. These are perhaps a great way to take the next step into our collective appreciation of this most legendary of technologies, but one that's still fairly misunderstood in some corners. And it's our job to, take that message back out to the IT world. And with that, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the summit. And we'll now drop out to the Q&A session. Thanks.